Our guest today is Myles Katz. He's a co-founder of the Synthesis Institute, one of the first legal psychedelic retreat that served over 1,000 individuals and raised over $10 million. And most recently, he founded Confluence Retreats. Thank you so much for being here on Noble Warrior. I'm really looking forward to have a conversation with you, Myles.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
So before we get into Confluence, that's definitely something that we wanted to ask you. I wanted to first ask you, zoom out for a second. Before you co-founded Synthesis, what happened? What happened to have you say, you know what, I'm gonna get into the psychedelic space?
Yeah, um, I was late to psychedelics. I feel like a lot of people I meet who work in this field were using psychedelics recreationally as a teenager, early 20s. I was pretty strictly a drinker of alcohol, and quite a lot, at those ages. And so I was really cautious about drugs. I didn't start exploring psychedelics until my late 20s, where I was experiencing a pretty, and this is language I can only use in hindsight, having done a lot of therapeutic work on myself, but where I was experiencing a pretty deep existential depression, without any idea of why or what. I was on surface level objectively living the dream that I had for myself as I graduated undergraduate in Boston. I was living in Kenya. I was running a startup social enterprise, helping poor farmers generate income through a really innovative business model. We had raised a few $1 million. I was earning a full time living doing that. And we had been featured in things like CNN, BBC. Like, it was a really small business, but it was a really sexy business for international places to talk about because of the different touch points of helping farmers and green circular economy and things of this nature. And meanwhile, on the inside, without having awareness or language, I was really suffering. And so, about once a year for a couple years, I was with some friends doing what, in hindsight, was not MDMA, but we all thought it was. And that's just the nature of illegal drug scenes around the world. And I described that I quite literally stumbled into LSD at a Africa Burn, so a regional Burning Man festival in South Africa. And this was unquestionably the experience that lifted the veil, as they say, for me. And I could tell you more about that trip if you'd like, but in short, life was never the same after that. I lost my interest to drink alcohol virtually overnight. I had this infinite spark of curiosity about this experience, which started with, oh my God, did I just melt my brain? Because I literally felt different in my brain and I was not knowledgeable or intentional about that first exploration. All the way to, wow, these are therapeutic experiences that other people also have. And there is a bunch of, it was 2016 at the time, so still before the most recent surge of interest and wave in the Renaissance and breakthrough therapy status from the FDA. But there was enough that as a late 20-year-old guy in rural Kenya, I could self guide myself on the internet to validate my experiences and learn about them and how to do them safely. And while I still ran that other business in Kenya for a couple more years, I really was just sitting in the office planning the next group LSD retreat that I was organizing.
Okay, got it. So I want to double click on the existential crisis running a
Mm,
sexy social enterprise thing, because
yeah.
for someone, let's just say, who's materially success, maybe in Wall Street, maybe Silicon Valley, one of their dreams could be, right, let me, sell all my possessions, go to Africa to helping people. So on the surface level, it's like
Yeah.
this should be very meaningful. So if you don't mind double clicking that on that a little bit, why the existential crises doing that?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think it is a very noble career within itself. I think for me, it was really wrapped up in, well, one, being less seasoned as an entrepreneur when I started that journey and having some really unrealistically false expectations about how people in that world would operate. So while everyone who participates in that world is good hearted and has good intentions, what I saw from a ground level operational perspective is really rich billionaires who were funding these businesses through their nonprofits as tax write-offs, creating really unsustainable circumstances in in this kind of emerging world of global social enterprise, where you'd have companies that had raised 10 to 50 million dollars, had massive valuations to justify that raise, and realistically were barely producing any revenue in a market that wasn't really going to grow the business organically like a well-established market in the US. So while the work itself was really helpful to the people who benefited, I became a little disheartened because the longer tail vision for working in that field was that eventually these businesses would be profitable. It would start to attract more and more typical investment, not just philanthropic billionaires who are seed funding all this. And eventually it would be, it wouldn't even necessarily be social enterprise and normal for profit business. It'd be a much blurrier line. And
I
in
see.
reality, yeah.
So what I'm gathering from what you're saying is um, the sustainability of it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got it. Okay.
and and my own personal trauma, which was not yet exposed and worked on because I lived a life numbing myself with alcohol every weekend. Was also
Mm.
a major factor in me not feeling fulfilled in that situation.
Got it. Okay. So fast forward, you had this African burn, great experience, help you see whatever you saw. You can get into it if you want to. And then now you're just dreaming about planning the next retreat. The substance of choice is LSD at the time. How do you go from LSD to psilocybin?
Yeah, so I'm in Kenya. There's no commercial interest of any of this. It's purely just this like exploration, a safe exploration of using LSD. We're organizing groups of 15 to 20 people once every 3 or 4 months to go into the woods, and from the outside, very much like looking like a recreational experience. And as I evolved in this role, they became more and more intentional. It wasn't just like bring your own drugs and do whatever you want. It was we all take it together. There's always a sober sitter. So it was, for people doing drugs, it was pretty safe and structured. And I just had this realization. It was like, I think it was early 2018. I'm sitting in Nanyuki, Kenya, which is 3 hours away from the closest city. And I'm just like realizing that all I'm doing is organizing these retreats for fun out of passion, like no money being exchanged. And I'm like, I should try to do this professionally because I'm um, clearly passionate about it. And that word passion was not something I think I understood to that point because I was excited about the work I was doing, but like a really deep sense, heart-filled passion was something different. And so I reached out to a handful of people on the internet who were visible in the psychedelic scene, which again, like at that point in time, was a small fraction of what it was today. And within a few kind of coincidental bumps and meetings, I got connected with two people who had the idea for synthesis and hadn't yet put anything together to like build an operation. I think they had like talked to a couple of people about it, and they actually approached me to be a customer. And I very kindly wrote them a very long email with all my ideas, just saying, I'm not your customer, but here's a bunch of ideas for how I would do this. And they invited me to join pretty much right away. So um, that's how synthesis started.
Okay. So these are people you barely know.
In
And then
different
you
countries.
said, okay, you're a kindred spirit.
Yeah.
You guys are doing this. I can offer, I'm assuming, some business acumen, some operational support. Is that sort of your role in the team
Yeah,
dynamic?
they both were very, relative to me at that stage, we're both very connected and resourced in the psychedelic world. One was the founder of the Third Wave, Paul Austin. Another one was
Hmm.
a Dutch guy, Mark
Hmm.
Tuinscherp. So he was the Dutch anchor, and like that was the legal model to work
Hmm.
in is the Netherlands. And I don't think it was explicitly stated at the time, but I was the operational person as it unfolded over the next few weeks. We did it was probably 4 months till we did our first pilot retreat. We had like a week long with three days back to back. We did it again a few months later, and we had originally planned to start the business full time in the middle of 2019, just based on
Hmm.
all our schedules, and I needed time to you kind of step away from my business in Kenya. But once Michael Pollan's book came out in 2018, it was like we just had so much interest and flow into our website that we ended up starting the business full time in November of 2018, just a few months later.
Mm.
So, out of all the entrepreneurial ventures I've been a part of, which is quite a few, Synthesis by far was right place, right time to capture what was very quickly at that stage a growing interest in psilocybin, mostly through Michael Pollan and a couple of clinical research studies that got breakthrough therapy status, and then all the media that happens with that.
Yeah. Right place, right time, riding the wave, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm big on Taoism. I don't know if you know about that
just
about
a little
me.
bit.
Yeah. So Taoism is about the Tao, the way, right? This invisible force, that's all around us. There's the wave within ourselves, but also greater waves within the family unit, with society, market, so on and so on, right? So sort of like you stumble upon it. Was it more intentional? Let's go after this, or was it literally, right time, right place, just luck?
Yeah, I say, um, well, all right. Like it'd be impossible to really isolate fully into
Mm,
any of those categories. I look back, my lens of synthesis, and I'm always trying to be really honest about this. Like my lens is more connected to the finances of the organization because that was my main role for a long
mm,
time, was raising money. And while we did like have great like at the time it was really unique to hear people talking about this combination of modern science and ancient wisdom in a retreat format. Now it's like everyone's talking about that, including myself still. And it was based on this like the third wave was like our main source for clients in the beginning. They're still a great resource for people to have psychedelics out there. And so while all those things were very intentional and strategic, also we Michael Pollan just happened to publish this book at that time, right? Um, I look in hindsight still at the story of synthesis, being strategic, being right place, right time. The first 12 or 15 people we hired, like just gold, like fully passionate, like rolling up their sleeves, like edging burnout, but for the right reasons and the right ways to make the vision we all shared work. And none of it would have been possible unless we raised capital.
mm,
And if you look about psychedelic retreats around the world, very few of them raise capital, and there's
mm,
a lot of reason for that. They're not particularly profitable business models in the long run, and so that's how I look at it. Like the right elements and an injection of capital pretty consistently throughout the first few years of the business. Just kind of the storm of the right ingredients to kind of build what synthesis was, which for a long time it was the place for psychedelic retreats in the Western world.
mm.
So
Okay, so on that note, I appreciate you going there right now. So what are some of the, knowing what you know today, what are some of the keys of success and key challenges during that time? Because you mentioned the key success already, right? Right place, right time, Michael Pollan's, handful of key employees in the beginning,
hmm
injection of capital.
yeah.
Is there anything else around the success, or is there anything else around the key challenges?
I look at life a lot as like, especially in like our capitalistic society, as like sometimes trauma patterns just fit capitalism really well and
Mm-hmm.
like inflate like or like kind of give a nice shove in the right direction to like grow a business. And I look at this with synthesis. All three of us co-founders had this like pattern of fitting together where it was like there were challenges and we were not as evolved or mature as we should have been to do what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do, I'm so grateful for like some of the first dozen or so team members that joined really held it together while we worked through stuff that like we needed to work through as a founding group. Um, that said, like it worked like the right mix of like wanting to be front and center but also balancing the dedication to science and research and eventually connecting with Robin Carhart Harris's lab to help study and validate our retreat model. And then I look at my own role in it, for better or worse, as like making sure we had money to do it all throughout the years. And so, yeah, it really like I don't know if I'll be another part of another venture that has all that right mix and timing, but um, yeah, it was quite a ride. I learned so much. I look at this experience as like a vacuum of learning in the psychedelic field because when else are we going to have virtually unlimited budgets to iterate and iterate and iterate on a psychedelic retreat model?
Okay. So, I mean, lots to learn there. So
Yeah.
here's a question that I'm sure a lot of people ask you
Mm.
inside your personal world versus, and, as well as people on the outside public. So, despite the outward success, synthesis closed,
Hmm.
2023, what happened, and what were some of the factors that led to the closure of it, in spite
Yeah.
of the initial, you know, all the media attention, all the
Catapulting.
money.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we started full time at the end of 2018, and we had about 30 to 45 people a month coming on a few different retreats. We kind of puttered through the beginning and middle of 2019, like kind of the the momentum was sustaining but not growing, and we ended up implementing some really improved sales processes and systems while also leaning more into media and things like scientific relationships that we had. By the time COVID hit in March of 2020, a couple things were, again, this is like really like to me like entrepreneurial journey, right place, right time. But we had raised a round of capital in February of 2020 and
Hmm.
closed it and got it in the bank. March comes, we have 100 clients a month booked pretty much for the next few months. So like this whole funnel challenge and foresight, like it wasn't seeming to be a challenge, but then COVID comes and everything has to stop.
Hmm.
Um, and really nothing was ever the same. I mean, we had money to navigate COVID both through that capital round, and the Dutch government actually had this really interesting program where they gave 90% of full-time employees salaries if you didn't fire your employee as like a COVID support system.
Hmm.
And so I was joking at the time, like we were probably the only psychedelic company in the world getting government assistance. And eventually we developed this training program, and that's kind of how we floated through the pandemic was pivoting to have a digital product and an online training program,
Hmm.
and also raising another capital round in the middle of the pandemic in 2021. And I'd say like there's a bunch of things that put the nail in the coffin. COVID never really stopped for us, like juggling different countries and jurisdictions, and most of our customers traveled from the U.S. to Amsterdam to go on retreat, and like
Hmm.
the travel restrictions never quite lined up again until very late in 22, and
Mm.
that was a pretty long time to keep waiting and waiting and not like fall starting. Um, we built a very unsustainable business model where yeah, the amount of sales we would have had to keep up with to keep our overhead was, in hindsight, incredibly unrealistic. And it was really all in the spirit of being the gold standard of psychedelic care and psychedelic education and these things. So I do think it was done with a noble intention, but in hindsight, like not a financially sustainable path to go down unless we kept raising money. Yeah, go
Quick
ahead.
question. So, because I don't actually know the nuances of your offering,
Hmm.
so I'm assuming, I'm projecting. Let me know if I'm
Yeah.
projecting here. I'm assuming it's the aftercare, maybe it's the doctors on site, and things like that. Is that what you're referring to?
Referring to in far as like unsustainable.
Yes.
Yeah, we did have a very unsustainable screening process that included a whole team of people who were paid a lot and for good reason, right? Like we were first in the field to be as public about what we were doing, and we really took
Hmm.
that seriously, and we didn't want to have any slips through the cracks. So, like one example is like at the time, it was not known to be safe to mix psychedelics and antidepressants or psilocybin and antidepressants. We spent a lot of time trying to work and figure out how we could support people instead of just rejecting them, because we also know that when you reject someone who's really desperate, which some of our potential clients were, because they're at the end of their line, they're hearing about this experimental treatment, maybe it can be helpful. Like we just worked really hard to try to take those people and figure out how we can support them. In hindsight, like unsustainable operation to
Mm,
work as closely with people as we did and try to get the sign-offs we needed to. And
mm, mm.
it's a little, it's quite funny because now in Oregon they estimate that the majority of people coming to Oregon are on some version of these medications because now it is proven as safe to mix the two. It's just a dulling effect. And so I think I use that as an example of like, I think at the time we said that 40% of the people we rejected was because of antidepressants, which
Mhm,
is,
mm.
as a business model, just a really challenging place to be. And a result of us being so early and so pioneering that and taking the stance we did about safety and integrity and reputation. Yeah. So, and that's an example of we raised the $5 million investment round in the middle of 2021 after like barely having any revenue since before COVID, which just gives you a sense of how wild the capital scene was for these types of businesses. I think 20 or so companies calling themselves psychedelic businesses went public on the junior Canadian stock exchanges over this 18-month period, raising way more money than we ever did to have no business models. Like saying they would do trials, saying they would do drug development, but having very little to stand on. And it was really just is also when the crypto phase was exploding, and I really look at it in hindsight as like, yeah, it was we did what we needed to do because we didn't have the capital and we didn't have the runway. And like, did we earn that $5 million investment round in hindsight? Probably not. And then we built an admin team to execute on a much bigger vision to justify that round. And all of a sudden, yeah, we also made a decision at this time to not try to raise any more capital. We were increasingly becoming aware of the negative effects of creating expectations and the limitations of growth in a field that is virtually illegal or on the edge of being legal everywhere you're trying to do it. And so, yeah, we made a conscious decision not to just keep pumping capital in, but at that point we also didn't make the business decisions to scale it down because of the integrity and the approach we wanted to have. So,
So you're kind of caught like, hey, we want to do this right, and at the same
yeah.
time, the revenue isn't coming in, and you also didn't want to raise money, so you're kind of caught
Hmm.
in the middle.
Yeah, I think there's
Yeah.
a hypothetical scenario where like if COVID was really like fully gone from the world by the beginning of 2022, I think there's a hypothetical scenario where we wouldn't have failed. And like I think it was like a necessary thing to happen in hindsight, at least for me in my entrepreneurial journey,
Yeah,
because
everything is a gift. Everything is a
yeah,
gift. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So I learned so much. Like no, like I there was challenging relationships for sure in
Hmm.
that entire endeavor,
Hmm.
and I am grateful to be in a place of just being appreciative for what I learned from all of them. And I told my therapist as I was starting this new retreat business about a year after Synthesis failed, like I now can see Synthesis as a 5-year, $10 million PhD program for me to do exactly
Oh,
what I'm doing
yay.
now.
Great. I'm so happy for you, dude. That's
Yeah.
I mean, to me anyway, I'm a nerd when it comes to transformation
Mm-hmm.
and psychedelics, beautiful. Burning Man, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Being an entrepreneur, though, it's one of those fast tracked for transformation. If we look at it that way, having kids. I know you're a father, right? That's
Yeah.
another, fast tracked as well. Being married,
Oh my
right?
God. Yeah.
um, well, anything you want to double click there?
About kids and
Yeah,
not sleeping.
yeah.
No, I mean, being a father is awesome. It fills life in a way that it almost feels like the stereotypes that people tell you before you have kids, like, oh, your heart will be so full, and you'll just stare at them and you'll say everything's so perfect about you. But like, there's a magic in experiencing it. And I have so much respect for anyone who's ever been a parent because of how do you function on no sleep? Like it was like I was And so, yeah, it's a part of my journey now. It really does impact how I look at my lifestyle. The lifestyle I had running Synthesis, I would not have had any space to have a family or kids. And I technically started the family as Synthesis was, kind of crumbling apart.
Mm,
And so when it came time
perfect
to
timing.
start, well, it did help create some perspective in the matter, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the other thing, I was in Oregon, so Synthesis sent me, and I voluntarily went to Oregon to get ready to for this new legal regulated model that Oregon was setting up. So I had this like pretty important role in finance, but I had a huge distance from the rest of the team. I was just living in Southern Oregon at the retreat center we had purchased to eventually turn into a service center here in Oregon. So I think having kids was like it would have been anyway, but having kids and being so remotely distanced from the actual chaos and the stuff that was happening and being able to turn off my laptop and go for a walk in the forest and realize that everything is actually okay, even though the business was objectively crumbling at that point, was a really powerful tool to keep perspective throughout the process. Um, and continued sense of like really a lot more intentional. Like I can look at my entrepreneurial journey and a lot of unconscious behaviors as like, yeah, like parts of my journey were not rooted in high integrity authenticity, and they were rooted in like wanting to be seen, or wanting, being afraid to speak up and not wanting to rattle the cage too much, but having like challenging co-founder dynamics that I didn't stand up to. And so, yeah, like coming and starting a new organization about 9 months after Synthesis had failed was a much more intentional, thoughtful process as
So
opposed.
so let's talk about that for a second, right?
Yeah.
So I'm imagine, being your wife, like,
Hmm.
what? You're starting another psychedelic retreat center after all this? So tell me a little bit about that conversation, and also obviously your own internal, rationale for taking everything you learned to start another one elsewhere.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really believed in what Oregon was and is doing. It's the only place in the world right now, and Colorado will follow suit next year, where psilocybin or any psychedelic is actively regulated. And
Mm,
I have this very unique perspective of having about 6 years, almost seven of a career now in legal psilocybin work. And it's not like I know there's many people who have more experience in the underground world, but there is a different flavor of working above ground and being seen, and there's accountability, and so towards the end of Synthesis, like
actually,
I
can you speak about that a little bit, if you don't mind?
yeah
Like, what's
yeah
the
just like
flavor? What
what's
are you
the
talking about? Yeah.
um so I'm also a burner, and I'm not afraid to admit that I do psychedelics in illegal ways, on an ongoing basis. But I do really believe in the safety and the that the legal model provides. So when I'm talking to potential clients for coming on a retreat, I'm staying in integrity and authenticity with my personal use of psychedelics by sharing with them like this is not the only way to try psilocybin. It's not even necessarily the best way to try psilocybin. But if it's your first time ever, it's a really well designed, thoughtful program that will make you feel really safe to surrender deeper into your experience because it is all legal and regulated. And I just really believe in that. Like for this movement to continue to evolve into the next stage of acceptance and utilization across a wider audience, like its legality is going to have to be really important, because this is one of the founding kind of visions of Synthesis is there was just as much as you can go to Central and South America or in people's backyards across the US to do ayahuasca and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of people that are never even going to remotely consider doing something like that. And so I talk to people all the time who like would not even consider going to other countries, or working underground because it just doesn't feel safe. And I know there are ways to do that that is safe, but I also just want to meet people where they're at. And so yeah, I really believe in this legal regulated framework. I don't have any trust or confidence or faith that the medical model for psychedelics, when it's finally approved through all the clinical trials, is going to be anything great. I mean, people have a hard enough time getting an appointment with their doctor. Try to schedule an 8 hour psilocybin session and then three preps and integrations with your doctor. So, and then the other part of that is like the medical model, like, is really focused on treatment. So, people are going to have their treatment for depression. Let's use that as an example with psilocybin in a medical container. Hopefully, it's good. I assume it probably will be good because I've seen throughout the years that if you just have a safe place and a a thoughtful experience, like generally the psilocybin is going to do something meaningful for someone. But I also witness all the time, and you probably do too, is like usually people don't take psychedelics once and then never want to try it again. And so, where are all these people going to go after their medical treatment, air quotes, and then they're left feeling curious, or they don't have the proper mindset on integration and other tools that they can use, like meditation and yoga and whatever it might be to maintain that kind of elevated state of being. And so, yeah, I'm like, you can kind of hear as I'm talking, I'm sure, but I'm really passionate that like this state legal model that's not distinctly not a medical model, and creates space for lots of different use cases of psilocybin is, I think, the best we're going to have for quite a while.
So, here's what I'm gathering from what you're articulating here. A big part of it is psychological safety, right?
Hmm.
It's legal,
Yeah,
above ground, everything is accounted for, dosed, and
yeah,
the physical safety component of it, as well as it's not just a treatment model. This is essentially a lifestyle. Like, here's how you can practice this outside of being in a retreat center, whether it's yoga or meditation, as a way to help you regulate your body, your mind, your spirit.
yeah.
Is that an accurate reflection?
I
Sustainability, that component of it?
I think so. And the way I usually talk about it is, for a lot of really good reasons. Like the world of psychedelics is usually stuck in talking about a treatment for a mental illness. And I think that's a reflection of not just the power of psychedelics, but also the baseline mental health level of our society. Like I tell people this all the time, like psilocybin is a great tool for depression, partially because it's a great tool for depression, and partially because our baseline mental health is so bad that one journey could just like take people who are treatment resistant for decades and put them into a better state. And I think that's a really narrow window of the longer journey of someone's mental health. So you have like on the small side of the axis, diagnosis, treatment, and then this is how I tell my own story. A much longer tale of what I would call functioning to flourishing. People who are getting by, maybe they don't need medications or they do, but only a little bit. Maybe they do some yoga meditation, but they're still hearing other people's stories in the media or on these documentaries that are coming out, and they're still feeling like something's missing for them. And flourishing doesn't mean you're perfect. It just means that you're more regularly feeling a sense of connection to yourself and purpose and the spirituality and others, and you're building meaningful relationships, and you're waking up with like a clear, a clear sense of why you're waking up for the day. And I think psychedelics, as you probably have experienced, can be really powerful tools along that longer tail spectrum. And legal access is part of people continuing down that spectrum. So yeah, that's how I usually talk about it.
I love it. Thank you. I mean, the metaphor that I say a lot on the podcast is, Ron Das is all, his whole thing is, when you're knocking on the door of God, God answers. You don't keep knocking, right? That's his
Mm-hmm.
whole, I understand what he's saying. At the same time, you don't just eat one time and say, I'm now full, I don't eat again, right? You don't just drink water one time. It's really a holistic, for me anyway, a lifestyle. I go to the gym every day, I meditate
Mm-hmm.
every day, I do these things as a way to optimize who I am as a human being. So this is part of that. That's the way I see it. So
Yeah.
thanks for articulating it. So segue. So now that you've learned a PhD, right, running a $10 million business around psychedelics, what are some of the lessons that you're taking into your new retreat?
So I'd say the first one that jumps to mind is no outside money.
Mm,
And for the person who was the only person at Synthesis for the entire duration of the company, outside our CFO, who we hired much later in the journey, I was the only person that had any experience raising capital before, and I held that as my role, keeping the sinking ship afloat. Not having any outside money in my current project, I feel like is a pretty big 180. I've gone as far to make it a nonprofit And the reason for that is I don't think anyone should own this work, including myself, even though I'm, pretty much a one man show at this point with a handful of part time helpers. Um, and I think it's a combination. Like, of course, the nonprofit legal structure is not perfect, but I do think it helps create a distance from some of the worst parts of our extractive capitalistic system. And yeah, if nothing else for me, it's like it helps me be in practice with the real why of why I'm doing this work. Given that we're a nonprofit, there's no donation button on our website. I've never asked someone for a donation. We do have tax exempt status because I applied for it, but I still haven't asked anyone for it. And that I think helps create like a really create helps create a boundary of intentionality around the experience, not just for me and my why, but the people we work with and the why with our clients as well. So that's the first one that jumps out. The second one is small and steady. At this stage, we're doing one small group retreat of 8 people per month. It's viable if I get 6 to 8 people, which I've been able to get, which I'm really grateful for. And it doesn't need to grow past that. I think it probably will. I really sense that and feel that. And if it never does, it's great. It's like those 6 to 8 people get really meaningful, well curated, personally held experiences. And I'm both running the organization and I'm one of the facilitators, and I get to really hold people's personal, intimate journeys all the time. And as I'm making leadership decisions on how we should approach things like marketing or partnerships as this crazy world of regulated psychedelics continues to unravel. Um, those are the
Actually,
two biggest ones.
actually, on that note,
Yeah.
well, again, I'm hearing the purpose-driven entrepreneurs are kind of whispering in my
Mm-hmm.
ears right now. Well, what about impact? You can serve more people if you,
Mm.
that I'm sure you hear that
Yeah.
as well,
Do you
right?
want me
Or
to?
some rationale and justifications for
Yeah.
raising
Do you want me
money,
to
or
respond to that?
yeah, please, 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 yeah, yeah.
Um, yes, of course. And I think in my personal healing journey, I have seen that that was like another version because I did that. Like that was really the why of why I raised not just that synthesis, the business I had before. I had that's where I learned to raise capital, and I
Mm,
raised a bunch of capital, which like probably wasn't appropriate for the stage and opportunity of the business, and it didn't create as much of a headache as synthesis. But yeah, I think I can see in hindsight that like that itch of like more and like if we just had enough money or we just had enough scale, it would just be like better and we'd solve these problems. Like I can see where that was coming from was not a really grounded place of and this is like really personal to my story, but it wasn't from a grounded place of like this is the right thing to do for the right reasons at the right time. It was really coming from a survival, an entrepreneurial survival standpoint. Um, and so that's where I hold this perspective now, where like I am pretty sure this thing will grow that I'm working on. And like, I actually do think it might be in the next 6 to 9 months where we're like doubling the amount of retreats we're hosting. And I have no attachment if that happens or not. And it's a really beautiful place to be able to stand in, to not have those external pressures. And I know more people could be helped theoretically, but I don't know. The world of legal, like here in Oregon, and then Colorado's going to open next year. Like, there's going to be no shortage of places people can go. I think we have a standout program, and there's reasons I think it's different and attracts a slightly different audience and is a deeper experience for a lot of people. But yeah, there's no like, unlike synthesis, it wasn't like there was nowhere else to refer people. We felt if we couldn't take people, we're here in Oregon. If I don't take someone, I know they're going to find another center to go to. So I don't
mm.
have, maybe that helps with the not having that like pressure of, bigger, 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 grow,
Yeah.
grow, grow.
Well, what I'm gathering from you is more of a transmission. You don't need the audience or the number of people to rationalize and justify that you're enough. That's kind
Mm,
of what I'm gathering from you.
yeah, it's
You know
beautiful.
what I
I
mean?
hadn't thought about it like that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
like you're serving people, and that's the extent, the capacity they can serve in an organic way. That's fine. You don't need 100,000 people, 10,000 people to finally be enough
Yeah. Well,
and to
and
serve the
it's
world.
That's a very succinct way of like summing up like my journey, like my healing journey around money, with startups and kind of that mindset. And I also like really still remember what it was like to try to serve 100 people a month at Synthesis. And I tell people all the time, like I think we did really good work with our clients, and I think that's like we earned the reputation we had. Everyone behind the scenes was not feeling good. There was like so many management dynamics, and you try to get a bunch of people who really care about psychedelics in a room to run a business. Like everyone's there because they have their own personal passion, and it's pretty hard to get everyone on the same page because no one's there for the paycheck, and they have really strong beliefs and opinions of how it should be done, or what approach or the ethics around it. And so, yeah, there's no part of me that wants to try to recreate that behind the
Yeah.
scenes anytime soon, or in a way that like we didn't earn, or like Synthesis didn't necessarily earn everything we got because we were sitting on other people's money that we were burning through pretty fast. And it does feel it's a really healthy orientation for me now to really have to earn everything, as an entrepreneur and as a small project. Like, and yeah, I appreciate it a lot more. It's a lot more grounding, and it lets, yeah, I don't know. It's been a beautiful journey. I mean,
So let me ask you some concrete question here, because you were at a very unique place, working with different universities, proper research scientists, had tons of iterations. You had the funding to help you with the iteration. So there's definitely a lot of tacit learning from that. So what are some
hmm
of the things that you learn in terms of ways to create a container that best help people to heal, to grow from these type of very transcendent experiences?
yeah, I think the appreciation I have, so like a really micro version of the founding story of Confluence, which is the current project, Confluence
Mm-hmm.
Retreats. Um, Synthesis failed in the beginning of 2023. 3 months later, the first license centers started to open in Oregon. And so my whole identity was wrapped up in this thing. Synthesis was coming to Oregon. We had the local media found out we bought this $4 million property. So it's all over the news. Big European company comes to Southern Oregon, you know. And then what was actually happening when it all went live was I had nothing to do with anything. And it was a really interesting like juxtaposition. And so I slowly started advising one of the local centers here in town. I still work there, out of there, for free. They're just friends. They're great people that run it. And I was like, oh, I do know a lot. I do this. So this experience was really valuable to learn how to do this. And then I saw how, and this is still true today, almost everyone that comes to Oregon for a psilocybin experience is getting a motel room, flying in from out of state. I think it's something 80 to 90%, is the estimate of people who fly from out of state. Getting a hotel room. They might have one or two Zoom sessions, with their facilitator beforehand, meeting their facilitator at the center that day, doing, a pretty high dose of psilocybin in most cases, like definitely more than Hero's dose is like the commonly prescribed dose.
Wait,
Got to,
more than hero dose, more than 5 grams? What?
yeah, yeah. People are
That
doing
doesn't
really
make
big
sense.
doses in Oregon. Yeah,
What?
it doesn't really make sense.
From
But
nothing
there's
to more than 5 grand? What?
Yeah, the
Wow,
state of Oregon allows for very high dosing, even beyond what was studied in scientific research. And there are a small number of use cases like, that I think are valid for that, where people don't come off their antidepressants and might need more to get a similar effect, but it's not detailed enough to regulate each specific scenario. So it's really just between the facilitator and the client to decide what the dosing is. But yeah, I looked at when I first was in this world, and just observing what was happening in Oregon compared to like the gold standard and what we were trying to do at Synthesis. It felt really disorienting because it was so much less well held, and so I really just kind of became disheartened with like, okay, and I tell this to clients today, it's like Johns Hopkins has like quantified that like for 80 to 90% of people, this psilocybin experience is going to be among the top 3 or 5 meaningful experiences or spiritual experiences in your life. It's like one of the more interesting research findings, in my opinion. And imagine having one of the most meaningful spiritual experiences of your life and sitting in a motel room by yourself in a city you've never been to. And as someone who had organized really thoughtful retreats, I just like know how much is probably getting lost. And I don't want to knock it entirely. Like it is a lot less cheap to do it that way. I have worked with people that way. I know they still get a lot out of it. But I really wanted to like take a stand in for like what could be possible in a better held container. And so that's where I kind of slowly started this idea to bring back the 5 day synthesis retreat model, which is what we had eventually, as an organization, we decided to only do these 5 day retreats. In the beginning, we did a lot of 3 day, but decided for the sake of the client experience, it was much better to do 5 days with 2 journeys. And um, the question you asked was, what are things about the container? Like, I tell people all the time, like, my objective for them coming in is, I want the only thing you have to really worry about is getting yourself to Oregon. I don't want you to spend time thinking about like where you're going to eat, or is it going to be okay, or like what if this happens and I need extra support late at night. Like, that to me is like all taking you away from like the depths of your inward process. And so that's a big part. Like, people can I hope people do more preparation work, and we give them a lot of tools and resources to do more preparation work. But I know that if people show up with like little to no preparation being done, like, the container is such where we can hold a lot of deep experiences, from people suffering with like real mental health challenges, to people who are just spiritually curious, to people who are going through grief of a loss. And what that looks like in practice is like having established contained places where everyone's together for the whole 5 days. Um, the people who are part of the retreat are not coming in and out all the time. Like, everyone's committed and being there, keeping that sense of safety. If clients need support at 9, 10 o'clock at night after their psilocybin journey, like, we're there with them, holding that space with them. We're not saying, oh, time to go home and clock out. Like, and then other things you'd expect on a great retreat, like healthy meals, like great facilitation of other workshops outside the psilocybin, things like breath work or meditation or yoga. Also downtime, a balance of downtime in addition to having a full schedule. I think what I've seen elsewhere in the world of retreats for psychedelics is that, and I like how Synthesis approached it, and I still do it this way today, is a combination of personal support and group. I really do believe in the power of groups, and you know all the reasons that psychedelics have been done in groups for many thousands of years. And we will meet with our clients just like Synthesis did, one-on-one before and after retreat, and then before and after each psychedelic journey on the retreat, and just gives people space to like ask the questions they're holding that maybe they don't want to answer in the group or ask, and or maybe they don't have time. And yeah, it kind of creates this duality of, I'm getting the group experience and the supportive group, and I'm building bonds and relationships, and I'm getting my personal intimate needs met because I know I have dedicated 45-minute time slots with my assigned facilitator throughout the retreat. So I'd say those are probably like the core premises of like the container and why I think it's better. I don't know how to
Yeah,
actually
no, I
use that
appreciate
word.
that. It's a great balance of the client experience as well as the transformation modality itself. How did you pick? Just out of curiosity, because I'm a practitioner as
Hmm.
well. How did you pick yoga, meditation, and breath work out of many others? I'm
Yeah.
just giving you some random things like Tony Robbins does, like fire walk or whatever. Some
Yeah.
totally random things, right? So
Yeah.
like, why these three things?
Yeah. That's funny. I had never thought so much about this. These are the ones that the team of Synthesis kind of iterated and chose on. I'd say breathwork. So we use breathwork just like Synthesis did just before every psilocybin journey. Um, and I don't know if I think there's a more universally powerful tool that can bring everyone much more in a state of reduced anxiety, feeling in their body, and groundedness just before the psilocybin. So what that looks like in practice is, in the morning we'll do about 90 minutes of a breathwork facilitated session, and we'll go into psilocybin really like 30 to 45 minutes after that's over. And that, I think, has a people will often have very powerful experiences in breathwork. People go on retreats just to do this, kind of transformational breathwork styles. And I always love, and I hope they do in retreat for us. But even if not, it just regulates your nervous system down to a place where you can go into the psilocybin much more um, calm and grounded, and less anxious. Other things, I like to think about like, and I can't take full credit for this because it was really the team at Synthesis, but like, what are things that we can expose people to that they're maybe not exposed to, that if it resonates really strongly with them, they can keep going on their own journey when they get home. So that's like comes to mind when you name a fire walk. Like people are probably not going to go home and set up fire walks for themselves. But yoga or meditation, like really available and something that like they can really start to dive into if that feels good for them when they go home.
Mm,
So that's probably the answer to that question. It's like a combination of like tried and tested, and also maybe creating a spark of curiosity for someone when they go home if they haven't already been exposed to those modalities.
yeah. I do want to segue to a different types of question. I'm curious because when Synthesis was founded, it was by three young guys, right? Who I'm assuming both. Anyways, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Three young guys, and I would assume that you probably are getting criticisms from indigenous cultures and like, hey, what are you guys doing?
Mm.
Did that happen? I'm curious.
I don't know if I remember any instances of that. I'll definitely agree with like three young guys that like in some ways had our heads up our ass and like weren't necessarily like the if you were starting over from scratch you wouldn't necessarily pick us three. So there's like, I agree with that statement. Even though as I shared earlier in this discussion, like it kind of was the right fit to make it catapult the way it did. I don't remember explicit comments from outside like that, but
Mm,
I there was a number of people who were of higher integrity and maturity. Some of them were in our kind of core, 12 or 15 that we hired first that helped bring a lot of that perspective and authenticity. I really think that like those first 12 people should have been called co-founders because of what had to
oh,
happen to make the wheels turn, and some of them were really holding it together for us while we were dealing with stuff that like I wish we didn't have to be dealing with about co-founder dynamics and capital raising and that stuff. And so um, yeah, I'm really grateful for those characters who really held a higher integrity on the wisdom and the lineages of using psychedelics ritualistically.
so which goes to the follow-up questions is now you're working with indigenous communities to, revive ancient healing practices, ancient
Mm,
wisdom. How are you doing it differently this time?
yeah,
And then what are some of the traditions or lineage or elders that you're, you know, um, borrowing or
yeah,
receiving,
yeah.
from to help you, bring this vision to fruition?
Yeah, I love that question. And I will just say before I answer that question, like I don't think like I've solved anything. Like it's a very complex uh, agenda item to be bringing cultures and wisdoms and people who are carrying things that like have are so far isolated from our modern world into a thing like a new regulatory process for a psilocybin experience here in Oregon. So the main ways I'm holding this thread is so there are a few. I'm just trying to think the right way to say this because it could go into a long story. The roots of this refounding of this retreat model, Confluence, was highly influenced by a close friend that I have who is a shaman from a local tribe, Klamath Shasta tribe, Northern California, Southern Oregon. He's an individual who is very psychedelically oriented. He was a military veteran that cured his trauma with PTSD, and later in life he went down the path of his lineage and being a shaman. And his name's Thunder Eater. He's a really interesting character, and he participates in our retreats. He's not there. He's not the psychedelic shaman. He doesn't hold licensure, so he's not allowed to be there. But he does hold a thread of wisdom and lineage throughout the retreat. He welcomes people to the land. He does kind of energetic clearings and just provides wisdom throughout the retreat. So that's a thing that we're doing that um, Synthesis didn't really do. Like Synthesis talked about wisdom traditions and lineages, but we didn't have anyone there to represent that at all. Thunder Eater is also one of the three directors of the small nonprofit that runs Confluence retreats, and the other director is also someone from a different regional tribe who isn't a trained shaman but holds this kind of duality of like modern and more connection to other ways of knowing and other ways of operating in our world. And so those are like the simple ways that I do it. We've done a number of reciprocity. They're small, right? We're a small organization, but we've done a number of reciprocity projects of paying to preserve different artifacts from different local tribes for just the sake of preservation. And yeah, and then I'd love to incorporate that more as we go on. But that's, I think I look at it as having those two individuals as part of the directors of the organization helps keep that front and centered and focused. And then having Thunder Eater on the retreats is a way that he's just there. Like I'm always checking in with him. He's, I don't usually use this language, but he's a type of spiritual advisor for me throughout this journey. And if there's ever like an ethics or a moral thing, and I'm always checking in with him, like, is this right? Like, how does this feel? And yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to have, and the way he showed up and became a part of this project is really synchronous. So um,
I appreciate that. Thanks for
yeah,
sharing the effort that you're making to pay homage, to pay reverence, and in honoring some of these traditions. And I think for retreat centers, was trying to do that, right? There's how should I say? If I look at a spectrum, one spectrum
mm-hmm,
is purely scientific. You're a medical establishment. You treat these things as molecules, medicines,
mm-hmm,
and that's that, right? And then the other end of the spectrum is like an ayahuasca church. It's all sacrament and it's all tradition. It's all culture, and then there's the middle, right? How do
right,
you not just saying words like honoring ancient wisdom traditions, but actually operationalize, like how do
mm-hmm,
you create a feedback loop so everyone benefits from being part of the ecosystem? I don't have an answer. This is just questions that I'm asking, so I appreciate that, how
yeah.
you answering this question as well.
And it's why I said I definitely don't feel like I have the answer either. I hope and expect that it'll be something that's continually revisited and iterated on and incorporated, hopefully in more meaningful ways as things go forward and our organization grows. Because it is important. I mean, I didn't even know this when I started this project, but the tribes around here in Southern Oregon like do have history with psychedelic mushrooms as healing and ritual, and there's cave arts and stuff like that in this region. So, yeah, how great is it to really start to incorporate some of their approaches that they learned and worked on over thousands of years into some of the more capitalistic approaches of like, we all need to get paid so we can live our life, and I think there's a way, and I do find myself like really, because of the experience of synthesis as failure, like I am mostly standing in the camp of like this is going to be a sustainable organization that keeps going, and because it could be easy to get lost and like I should give away more, I should do more in the reciprocity, and it's helpful to have the perspective of my co-directors to be checking in on this because I am standing in the camp of like longer term. I want this organization to be like a thing that's, it's not like a project that only exists because I'm putting in my 60 to 70 hours a week to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the through line of our conversation is sustainability ultimately. Sustainability in terms of your physical energy, the time with your family, you get the agreement from the wife, right? Sustainability in terms of business model, sustainability in terms of involving, local indigenous culture and sustainability just overall long term, and COVID or no COVID, right? Things like that. So how
Hmm.
can you basically make this organization as anti-fragile as possible? So that's what I'm getting from this. Hey, Miles, is there anything else do you think I should be asking, but I didn't ask you at all from our conversation?
I think we covered a lot. I feel like I was looking at the timer and I'm like, how do we cover all those topics? It feels like could have been much longer, but no, I think it was great, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions and prodding a little bit into my personal, perspectives, and the reflections you gave me were even surprisingly insightful for me. So
Beautiful.
grateful to be here.
Hey, Miles, let me just take a moment to acknowledge you. I appreciate the honesty and sincerity that you even just the willingness to have a conversation with me publicly about the rise and fall of synthesis, as well as the new birth of
Mm,
Confluence retreats.
yeah.
And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of you, how you're running Confluence now, taking all the lessons you got from synthesis, and then and then balancing your personal life, as well as this aspiration to really make a difference, as well as the aspiration to take it and help it grow further.
Mm.
So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time here on the Noble Warrior podcast.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to have that. I hadn't thought about this before the podcast, but there was always a part of me that wanted a chance to tell the story in a certain way, and I feel like this probably achieved that for me. So I appreciate you giving me that opportunity.